Hello people, and welcome to a very, very special episode of the Tech of Tomorrow podcast with Sebastian Hidalgo. I am Sebastian Hidalgo, and this is the show where we believe that the technology of the future, the real technology of the future, are the people building the future. And before we begin, remember to follow the show, to subscribe on any platform, to leave a comment below. This podcast should cause some debate, so please share your ideas. So if we bring this guest again or a similar guest in the future, we can share what you have to say and what you have to ask. Now, who is my guest today? My guest today is somebody who is actively contributing to building the future and shaping your life and mine if you live in Europe. What do I mean by that? My guest today is Sergey Lagodinsky, a member of the European Parliament since 2020, member of the Democracy, Rule of Law, and Fundamental Rights Monitoring Group, and a member of the EU Council of Foreign Rights. He is also helped in negotiating the controversial, beloved, and hated AI Act. So, Sergey, welcome.
Thank you. Nice to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
It was a pleasure. I think we bonded. I mean, I bonded with you as you were on stage. That's the thing with people. When people are speaking in public, you tend to bond with the speaker. Where I found common areas is that I grew up in Venezuela, you grew up in the Soviet Union, and your talk was about a critical topic regarding technology, which is freedom.
Yes, for me, it is a topic which, some people think about technology as being just about something about bits and bytes and about a keyboard and a screen. For me, and probably for you as well, you know very well how technology can empower on the one hand, can take you out of a society which is totally closed and give you suddenly a window towards a society or a world, a universe that is totally open. But technology can also go the other way around and can suppress you. And I think, when I was in the Soviet Union, where I grew up there, we did not have a technology like this, but we had other things. We had radio stations or TV stations or video tapes, which kind of were this little window. Now, of course, it's much more interactive and much more empowering.
How how do you see the freedom landscape changing from where you were when you were in the Soviet Union, which was again a very limiting place in terms of freedom, I guess? How has freedom changed? What are the current threats to freedom, the main ones that you see?
I think it used to be that in real dictatorships, of which we're having less and less. I think it's about controlling physical infrastructure, um, whereas now increasingly, I think authoritarians and dictators are learning how to control your mind with your technological advances, with the technological advances that we have. And I think this is the switch that they were able to make, but we in the free world still haven't understood. For us, you mentioned it. I'm a member in the Foreign Affairs Committee, for example. We have a committee on human rights, subcommittee on human rights. To be honest, most of the people would have probably said just a couple of years ago, it is about mostly political prisoners. It's about people who are kept in their countries, they're not allowed to leave the countries. That's about suppressing media, and many would think about newspapers. Maybe this is gone. I think. I mean, of course, we have very harsh situations like this, but I think the big thing, how those authoritarians are controlling the masses, their population, individuals, is through manipulating digital reality and trying to create and manipulate the real reality through manipulation in the digital realm. And this is the actual thing, because on the one hand, we need this digital reality. We need this advances, and we talked about this in Frankfurt about the AI opportunities. But then there is a switch that they can use, and then they switch it from freedom to unfreedom, and suddenly we are all in the trap. And this is precisely what I think and what motivates me to deal with this issue: how to prepare for this dangerous switch, how to avoid that the same technology that is used to empower you is suddenly used to suppress you.
You know, I am very close to the intelligence community. I took this year a long training in psychological operations, and one of the points that the trainers emphasize is that in our world, as you said, we are behind as West when it comes to the what NATO calls the fifth domain of operations, the cognitive domain. Now, why do you think that happened? Why did let's call them what they are, our tactical enemies, get so ahead in the cognitive domain while we stayed behind as West, as Europe, as United States?
Um, Sometimes I think, and this is not a kind of a finalized concept, but I'm just sharing because it's an ongoing process. I'm also like questioning why. Um, but sometimes I think one point is that we were thinking that, but merely with soft power, we would be able to make an offer to the world, to people. And this offer is so attractive and so tempting that any individual who is free would always decide that he wants freedom and he wants democracy as we understand it. And we thought it's just it's the biggest power that we have. It's the end of history, you remember? I mean, you don't remember, but some of the viewers probably remember. You're too young for this, but I remember early 90s, after the fall of the wall. And when Fukuyama wrote in the 90s, it's the end of history, not because we're going to disappear, but because the competition between democracy and autocracy or dictatorship or communism is over. And everyone realized that's it. We found a better system. And this is not the case because people don't realize it. First of all, our system is not perfect. And we cannot claim having solved all problems with democracy. And number two, I think we're under-equipped, conceptually under-equipped, when we're faced with autocrats and dictators. It has different reasons. I think one of the reasons is that in a democracy, you are busy with so many things at once. You have to deliver on so many different issues because you have to convince people by really convincing them and not by forcing them and by putting pressure on them and suppressing them. That you do not think about how to sell these things, how to communicate these things. Political power and political abilities are endless. They are not, they're how to say, not they're endless. They are, I don't remember the English word. They are not endless. They are discrete, I think. Limited. So and dictators don't have to do this. They can basically solve everything by using power and using suppression. So, and under these circumstances, we are lagging behind, and we're not thinking about the currency that dictators have, and their currency is propaganda, manipulation, and now also subverting digital means for their manipulative and suppressive purposes. And we are still not used to this. I think we're not equipped to think this way. And now we're slowly learning how to at least defend our free space. But this is a process that takes time.
I think a component of it is also the fact that in the West, over the last generations, we've grown accustomed to freedom. So many people don't see how privileged they are to live in a free society, which leads me to the next question. You grew up in the Soviet Union. I grew up in Venezuela, and I see my people right now having zero freedoms. But what is something you can tell the audience that was missing in the Soviet Union that you didn't have, that now it's freedom? Where do you see that dichotomy? What do we have that you didn't have growing up that made you so attached to freedom?
We didn't. I mean, it's everything. We I mean, it's probably similar to what you are experiencing because there is shortage with products as well. I grew up in an area where we were not. It was in the provinces. It was not in Moscow or somewhere in the center. Uh, we didn't have meat. We didn't have dairy products because it was in the south. The production of milk and butter did not function. I didn't know what is whipped cream. I didn't know what it is. I remember once we went to Moscow and we went to a ballet, the ballet performance, and in between, my parents brought me to um, in a break in the canteen. And in Moscow, they've had a little bit better standards than in my town. And then I ate this thing that I had never eaten before, and I enjoyed it. And I ate one portion, one plate, and another plate, and another plate, and then I couldn't finish the third plate. And then for years in my childhood, I regretted not having finished this third plate, and I didn't know what it is. And then at some point, when we already started traveling, and where I was allowed to travel to the United States, someone bought this little thingy and then just pressed on it, and then this thing came out of which I was dreaming. This was whipped cream. I didn't know what it is, and I was like, "Oh my God, it tastes like a cloud," you know. And so, um, this is a funny element, but of course there were other things. These were opportunities that you didn't have. You couldn't travel. We didn't know what was going on outside. And this is one of the differences that we have now with digital world that we have. There are no informational borders. Unless you live in North Korea or maybe in China where there isn't parallel internet, but even there you can do it with VPN. You actually can get information from outside. And we didn't have it. We had this was a large country. We didn't have internet, obviously. There was radio, but the radio waves were suppressed. So when I wanted to listen to a foreign radio, American radio or German Deutsche Welle, I could only hear like I couldn't listen to what is going on. So the world in which I was living was the world constructed by propaganda. I thought everyone was dying outside of the Soviet Union because they were hungry and didn't have a roof and didn't have a place to live. So, and then when it opened, this was a really, it's like getting wings, you know, you're like, you can fly because you suddenly have the whole world and you're learning so many things that were lied to you about. Now it's different. Now the manipulation works by polluting the informational space in internet and this is what I see in the Russian speaking world. I'm sure you would probably have it. I don't know how it is in Venezuela, but it's probably something similar by making people so confused about the reality outside that then it's easy to feed them things that they would apparently trust, which is provided by authoritarians and by the powerful ones, and then you tempt them, you seduce them to think in a special steered way. And this is something that I see now, for example, in Russia. You know, YouTube is not banned in Russia. There are plenty of opposition people whom we got to Europe who have their YouTube channels, and they are not banned in Russia yet. I think Russian government is preparing to ban them, but people still don't believe them because the government says they are liars, they are traitors, they are creating their lies, the Western type coined lies, and then they have this. We are the one who give you security, who give you stability, who anchor you in your new constructed identity of nationalism. That's the new way of seducing and controlling.
It's fascinating because when I ask you the question, what didn't you have that we have, you said everything. And that's one of the best ways to say it. Also, I relate so much to that because when you are under a dictatorship, you don't have access to some things that are pretty normal. I remember the first time I saw a vending machine to get like a can of cola. I was 7 years old, and I had to
Yeah.
go to the capital to see a vending machine. And
Yeah.
it was a terrible, I will not narrate the circumstances because it was like somebody in the family had died. But me as a kid, I was extremely excited about a vending machine, which is something I could only see in a movie. And then
Absolutely.
when my parents told me we are moving to Europe, to Italy, I was 10 and I was almost 10 and I didn't know where Europe was on the map. I didn't even have a world map in my mind because education under a dictatorship is also something that's very controlled. And that's something that people don't get, that your entire worldview is probably limited to your country or maybe your continent.
Exactly.
And in my case, I was like, Europe or Italy, where is that? I remember only hearing from Europe from like History Channel, but I didn't have a geographic location in mind. So that's what people don't get about dictatorships. They just remove any of all access, which leads me to the point. Something that I think is playing a key role, as you said, is YouTube and social media. Because back when Cuba was under Castro, you saw generations of Cubans that had no access to any other knowledge. So for them, living under that in those conditions became reality. Meanwhile, in Venezuela, you saw 3 months ago how even young people were pulling down statues of Chavez. And that's, if you compare it to Cuba, that looks weird until you realize those people have access to the internet, so they can see that there's a world outside.
This is a huge currency that democracies have and that freedom has now. This borderless information, but as I mentioned, um, it's also currency of dictators. Because they can do, you don't have to close the internet. You can make a parallel internet. You can, what they're doing in Russia now is they're slowing down YouTube. So they're not closing it yet, but they're slowing it down so that people are like, okay, well, we're giving up. We cannot watch it. We cannot enjoy an opposition show on YouTube because it's like everything is slowed down. It breaks. So there are very inventive new ways of doing it, or packaging things in ways that are very attractive, very Western, very forward-looking. I mean, in Russia and China, but in fact, they're just there to satisfy our consumerist self, but not our self-fulfillment and freedom self. And this is a difference. I think that in the Soviet Union and maybe in Venezuela, but definitely also in Cuba, there was no way to satisfy your consumer self. So you had to find other ways. I just as you said now on the vending machine, I saw for the first time in my life, I saw some colorful Mickey Mouse magazine. Like there's Mickey Mouse books. When I was 12 or something, when I was in a pioneer camp, two Finnish young communists were in our unit, and they had like all these colorful things that we never saw in our lives. I think that the power that they're using now is consumerism, and this is something that I also mentioned in Frankfurt. And this is, I think, something that has a lot to do with digitalization. They are giving you digital services. They are digitalizing government. They succeed in many of those issues very well and very fast because they don't have data protection laws, because they don't have fundamental rights checks, because they don't have to think about this. And people enjoy it and they consume it. And then when, opposition people whom we get to, anti-Putin, anti-war people whom we get to Europe, to Germany, where we're not there in terms of digitalization for many reasons, but also because we have data protection laws that they make it a little bit difficult to digitalize everything. They are totally stunned, and they say, "What the hell? You know, in Moscow, in this authoritarian regime, we could do everything online. We could do all our communication with government, with administration online. Here, we have to make an appointment months ahead, and instead of doing it online, like in Moscow, and they are like, you are far behind. But they don't realize that Moscow now, the government, the Putin now, is using this. So, for example, the digital accounts that every citizen has, especially in Moscow and in larger cities, they're using, for example, they change law. If you want to avoid draft, military draft, you could refuse taking the draft. How do you call the letter that calls you to appear in the draft authorities. Because the law used to say you only become, a violator of law if they handed you the draft papers and you refused to come. They summon you, but you don't come. And now they changed the law, and they said it's enough if this draft summon ends and lands in one of your digital accounts with which you used to be so cool. You could do everything administrative in 1 second, and now this coolness, this coziness is being used, this comfort is being used to suppress you. They say if this draft summon is in your inbox online, Gosuslugi is the name of the system, then they changed law, then you're already in violation if you don't do anything, and then your license can be canceled, you cannot travel, etc., etc. So this is the point that I also mentioned when we talked in Frankfurt. Where is this? Many people just don't realize why I'm so driven, and we are so driven by this. They say, we live in democracy. It's about comfort. It's about digitalization of the administration. Well, you never know who would come to power. And you never know with which intent people can use technology that makes you comfortable. But if it's not checked through data protection, then it can be very easily turned into a digital autocracy, an authoritarian regime, or a digital dictatorship. And we have to be vigilant on that.
I had to admit before hearing your speech at the AI Week, I had a very narrow view of tech regulation, meaning despite my background, I hadn't taken into consideration the freedom angle. But hearing you speak, I did realize that, yes, there is a point to putting guardrails on this thing, right? So would you say that the AI Act specifically is a step towards avoiding that digital authoritarian government that could happen? Because, I totally agree with you on the point that you made. People live in a democracy and think it's going to be like that forever and assume it's been like that forever, but they never realize that all it takes is the wrong person in power and democracies are like this. So how is the AI Act safeguarding us from that grim future that we want to avoid?
I don't want to come across as a tech pessimist. I don't think that technology, that we have to have the grim versions of it. We don't live in Netflix, and it's not a Black Mirror. However, you never know. And if you see the results of our elections in Eastern Germany, for example, where the Alternative for Germany right-wing party, in some of the places where I also partly live, got 47%. And then another pro-Putin party, 17 on top. It's a village, but this is the trend. You never know who will be sitting there on the other side and what they will be using it for. So when we look at because Artificial Intelligence Act has various categories of technologies, and we dealt with it in different ways. Generally, we say AI is not regulated. That's this, people have to understand, AI Act does not regulate all AI. It only regulates certain technologies. So, for example, there are some bans where we said, we don't want to go this path. We don't want to go down this path. For example, social scoring. And I completely understand that for insurance companies and some other companies, this is important to have some certain statistical, statistical analysis of your data in order to. But this is not what is meant by the ban that we have. What we mean is that the Chinese situation, where you basically are scored in accordance to your conduct, to your behavior. And your social behavior is then results in certain restrictions. And you have a score, etc. The Chinese way. But there are other things. For example, it was important to me and my team that we ban emotion recognition with AI. And this is a technique which many people don't know, but this is a technique where there are, I think, about 1,000 pictures are taken from you while you're staring in a camera. For example, if you're in a COVID situation and you are taking Zoom lectures or school classes, and then in accordance with some statistical correlations, they are looking into your or AI is looking into your muscle reactions that we as people don't even see. So they are looking what muscles on your face are reacting or moving in a way that we don't see with human eye. And then because they're doing this 1,000 takes per minute, I think. Probably. I don't remember the exact number. So very many. And then based on some scholastic, on some probability correlations that are not really scientifically proven, they derive from this, not how you look, but what you feel. And that's already, apart from the fact that this is very invasive, because they're basically trying to figure out, what do you think? Not what you say, but what does he really think? Does he really mean it? It's also something based on wrong and not proven correlations, and it's also very controlling, and can also lead to wrong results. So, for example, if you use this technique against suspects, then you turn the presumption of innocence around, because presumption of innocence means that the police people have to present evidence that you have committed a crime. But if they look at you and read your emotions and say, according to AI, you are lying, it's kind of a better lie detector. Then suddenly you have to exculpate yourself, as they say in law. You have to present why you are innocent and not the authorities. So just one example on how this can really lead to a situation where our freedom-based understanding of how authorities and law and prosecution and law enforcement works is suddenly put on their head. So this is something that we wanted to ban it altogether. Now, after the negotiations, it's now banned if it's in the area of school or in employment, so that employees cannot be surveilled through this. Is he really looking into computer, or is he thinking about his next vacation instead of working on what is done? This is really nasty technology, which we don't want on the working place. And things like this are things that where you have the switch. Yeah, you can. And some companies said, and I understand, some companies said, we want this facial recognition and emotions recognition in the area where people are, for example, where their faces cannot transmit emotions, their health, for health reasons. And then they said, okay, then there is an exception, but you can make it switch. The switch, the authoritarian switch that I'm talking about, can be very easily used here as well.
So what we're talking about here is basically using regulation to prevent overreach from the governments themselves.
From the government, but also, I'm sorry to say, I don't want government, but I also don't want Mr. Musk to also observe my emotions. Either. We see where it is leading when technological giants are starting to intervene into and starting to project their ideological ideals on their companies, and this is a big problem as well.
What's your thoughts when it comes to what are your thoughts when it comes to people that are concerned with the EU maybe over-regulating technological development? How do you see that? Because I've heard from several entrepreneurs in the AI space a lot of concern about the AI Act because they see it as the start of a trail of over-regulation that will make innovation not possible. What's your response to that, if you have any?
I think it's a legitimate concern, and that's why the regulation that was adopted at the end is not as heavy as it was planned at the beginning, at least on the parliament side. As I said, just as an example, emotion recognition, not total, but only in certain sectors. We wanted, for example, a fundamental rights assessment for all AI in risk areas. Now it is only limited for AI employed by public entities or entities that are providing public goods. And this is something where already the process of the European Union legislation is already producing results that are mitigated because, we are talking to 27 governments at the end, and they say, we have this constituency or these people, we have these concerns for law enforcement, etc., etc., and then you arrive in a kind of a consensus based outcome. But beyond that, I think that it's a legitimate concern. It's a legitimate concern, and of course we also read Draghi report, and it's not like we're communists who want to regulate everything. We want a balance, and this balance should be healthy, and this balance should also allow innovation and allow entrepreneurship, because this is what generates our well-being and our welfare. And that's why I think it is important that I wrote a paper together with a German colleague on the new tech deal, that we should now also go over into the realm of supporting entrepreneurs and companies and supporting innovation. And there I share Draghi's report consequence that we need more investment into those areas, because obviously without investment, both public but also private capital, and we all know, I'm sure your viewers also know the issue of venture capital, capital for scale-ups, etc. We have a big problem with not very dynamic and quite risk-averse capital, private capital in Europe, and the challenge will be how can we dynamize the private capital and also use public capital to ignite innovation and production. So these are the issues, and these are the topics that we should be paying much more attention in this term. I think we have done good regulation during the last term. We should watch that this regulation should be implemented, because the Commission, for example, is now formulating the norms based on the AI Act. I think these norms should be clear and should not be confusing, and should be kind of elegant in a way. But I don't think that what I don't share is this perception that we need to have a kind of a wild west AI, that everything should be allowed and then it will all kind of regulate itself. we see now with all the entrepreneurs in the big tech, the risks of such development. And therefore, I think a healthy balance is important.
You touched on a topic that I had on my list of topics for today with you, that was entrepreneurs. There is something that Macron said last month about how if Europe doesn't speed up, if Europe doesn't maybe change mindset, we're going to be left behind in 2 to 3 years. There's also a trend. I'm noticing a list among entrepreneurs in my network of people with skills, people with knowledge, and people with money leaving Europe because they have the feeling that our governments, and maybe includes the EU, are not caring about them, that taxation is too high, that it's difficult to thrive in here. How do you see that? Is Europe going to be left behind if we don't change mindset between within the next 2 to 3 years? And should entrepreneurs push somehow, or will there be any push towards making it easier to thrive in this continent?
I think that there is, as I mentioned, there is an understanding that we need to get better there. There should be also an understanding that, especially with small and medium-sized enterprises, they are not our enemies and we're not their enemies. I think this is the mindset which we should be leaving behind us, if anyone ever had it, that anything that has to do with earning money and generating revenues is an enemy of our society. This is not the case. We are allies. And if things are done right and in accordance with rules, they are, yeah, they can reinforce our ability to deliver as democracies. So from that perspective, I think there is a mindset change, also a shift. Because if you look at the discussions now in Brussels, most of discussions are about reducing bureaucracy. Not only Brussels, also in Germany, in Berlin. You know, in Germany we're having new elections. I'm sure this topic will be also on the radar. But also on increasing investment in those areas, and that's the question of how do we deal with issues like financial and you know, the wrong understanding of fiscal discipline, because you cannot, especially, you know, in Germany or in Europe, if you are in a economically precarious situation when the economy is not starting, is not going up but going down, you need consumptive but also, you know, general investment. And if you are afraid of borrowing money, then you will not have a kick start for your economy. And this is true, of course, for startups and for medium-sized enterprises, but also for larger companies. And this is how I understand our role. And it's not even Keynesian. It's just the usual, the wisdom of any you know, economy one, yeah, of course, first course in economy and in macro economy. You have to invest, and you have to invest capital if your economy is having problem. The other issue is labor, and as you know, the labor also in those areas is a huge problem, because we're not attractive for young, interested, and interesting people and experts, especially well-educated. They do not opt to go to Dresden or Leipzig in Germany for many reasons. Also because the salaries are not competitive for that segment, because Americans are just paying much more, American big tech. But also because the infrastructure is not right. and we need to invest more into infrastructure. But also, the welcoming atmosphere is not there. And if we have right-wing governments more and more taken over in our European regions, then I'm not sure why an Indian expert would ever move into those to those areas instead of going to Canada or United States. So there is a whole kind of agenda that we have to work on. And I mean, again, this is a classic economic economic formula. It's capital and it's labor. On both sides, we have to work.
I was debating with somebody recently about the European Union, entrepreneurship, and all these things we're talking about. And I did tell the person that it would be nice if people up there, like you in Brussels, heard more the voice of entrepreneurs. And this person challenged me. She asked me, are entrepreneurs even willing to go talk to those people? And do they even know if they can? Now, my answer to that was that I don't know. So my question to you is there any way for our entrepreneurs, an association of entrepreneurs, to make their voices be heard with people like you in Brussels, to have some sort of influence, or at least to share what their needs are?
But I think this is a process that is ongoing. I don't think there is a muted. You're not a muted. They are not a muted community. We have representatives here. I just a week ago I spoke and made a keynote on Bitkom, which is a German digital entrepreneurs union. No, I think there is a larger concern that some NGOs and transparency NGOs have, is that there is too big of an impact of lobbies and interest representation. I do not share those concerns, because I think that if we make things transparent, and if we as legislators and lawmakers have a very clear compass, as they say in Germany, a very clear understanding of where we want to go and how we want to deal with this information. We need this information. I need information from NGOs, just as I need information from the world of entrepreneurs. If I don't have this information, where should how should I know about the reality outside that we are regulating? But I don't have a feeling that entrepreneurs are not getting their views and their concerns across in Brussels or in Berlin. I think they're doing a great job. I mean, in Berlin, we have an AI KI-Verband, like a union of AI enterprises who are also very voiceful and very forceful in their communication. So, yeah, I don't see this. We need to listen to those voices, but we also have the opportunity to listen if you want to listen. Of course, if some colleagues don't want to listen, then I cannot force them. But I get the input because we talk to people like this.
All right. You're on this show, so that proves your point, at least for yourself.
Yes.
Listen, I want to be mindful of your time. We're getting to the top of our hour together. I just want to ask you, like, people see politicians in Brussels, politicians in general, as very detached from reality, and we don't know what you guys do. So I'm talking here for the general population. So let's bring it to a lower level. What is a day in the life like for a European Parliament member?
Days are different, but they usually start at 8 or at 9, just as with any other person. Very often at 8. And then the day continues until late at night, because during the evening you either have hearings, like for example yesterday we have hearings of commissioners that lasted until I think 10 in the evening, or you go for some reception, but not, at least in my case, not to drink or eat, but rather to exchange on issues. Because to be honest, I don't think, and I don't belong to the people who like, I wouldn't enjoy going to receptions every evening just to have some food because I would enjoy just being at home and watching Netflix or talking to my loved ones or whatever. So it's actually a business opportunity or an exchange opportunity rather than something like a luxury thing. And in between, you have committees, you have working groups preparing committees, you have discussions with your staffers. This morning, I started with a breakfast with Foreign Minister of Ukraine, where we discussed very openly and honestly what can and should be done, what is going on now there and in Europe, in the United States. And in the evening, I will have a meeting with an ambassador of another country. So because it depends on what kind of a mix of topics you have. In my mix is both foreign policy, but also digital issues and economic issues. So it's mixed, but also regulative issues. So it's yeah, mostly it's a day that doesn't have that many breaks. If you take this seriously, and of course there are like probably colleagues, not in our group, but larger groups have more MEPs, and some of them don't have enough topics, I guess. But this is not the case in a smaller group like ours. We have too many topics on our plates because we have to cover with fewer people the whole array of legislative issues of the parliament.
Last question from me. What do you love the most about your job?
It's the best job I've ever done. I'm totally, because I worked as a lawyer, I worked as a manager, I worked as a writer, and this is the best job I've ever done because you can be creative, you can have impact, also impact on people, on their lives, especially if it is about human rights defenders or opposition people. We got so many Russian opposition people to Germany and saved their lives. And some we didn't manage to save, like Alexei Navalny, who's a good friend, or was a good friend. But we're trying, we're doing our best, and this is very rewarding because you see people who that their work, their life is kind of a result of your contribution as well. And the same on other issues, AI, or it's a different level, but it's also impactful. And this is something which you maybe see in other areas as well, but here it's like so concentrated, so dense, and it's so based on communication and exchange with people that it's the best mixture I've ever experienced in my professional life, and I wouldn't like to miss it.
I love that answer. Listen, I'll wrap it up here. Do you have any final thought for our listeners?
Well, do get involved into politics. Do not be discouraged, because there is this notion that politics is something bad or unsexy, unpopular. As I said, you choose what kind of politics you represent and how you do politics. And you can choose to get cash from some weird rulers from weird countries, or you can choose to really shape the future of democracies and of people. It's your choice. It's always your choice. But the opportunity that you have is unique. And so especially young people, do think about this. It's really worth it.
I loved it. People, get involved. Protect your freedoms.
Absolutely.
Big topic from both of us. Protect the freedoms. And Sergey, thank you so much for being on the show. It was a massive pleasure to have you on. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you. Thanks so much for inviting me, and thanks for doing what you're doing.
My pleasure. People, this was the Tech of Tomorrow with Sebastian Hidalgo, follow, subscribe, comment, share this episode in your networks so that more people can get access to this type of knowledge. And I will see you in the next episode.